What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with some Philly sports talk. Got to start today's show off with some personal news. You hear that song in the background? Going to be at Sixers games also coming up now this season. I'm psyched to be on site for 3 of the 4 teams now. Been at the Flyers games for a couple of years, got to go to the Phillies games this summer. Now I'll be credentialed as a Sixers media member also. Get to mesh my skill set with access to the local teams. Got 3 out of the 4. What does that mean for the show? Probably more Sixers content, yes. And I'm in the works of getting a big fish there for a guest I want to hit up. Hoping that works out, but I'm also hoping it helps get a little more content for the show targets, and that's young professionals in the modern media landscape. One emphasis of the guest interviews I've done so far, but something I'd like to take and augment the sports talk on this show to make it one of our best elements. And remember that message. I think it's all about professional skill sets, determination for what people want, and moving through the world despite its challenges. That's how I got into sports media in the first place. And some of these things are inevitable in any workplaces. Everybody faces challenges that beat us around inside and outside every day. But just like in any walk of life, professionally, personally, whatever, you got to overcome challenges. You got to overcome things you don't want to do. And that is the perfect segue to the real topic of the day. The weekend news, we had 2 high-profile Philadelphia athletes responding to hate. A work colleague of mine, Kevin Cooney, also the Associated Press and 97.5 The Fanatic, witnessed the locker room altercation with Joel Embiid and a columnist of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Joel Embiid shoved the media member in the Sixers locker room on Saturday night after the Sixers lost to the Memphis Grizzlies, and Kevin recounted that incident on Sunday morning when he joined Ray Dunn on 97.5 The Fanatic.
Kevin, you were there last night for the AP, covering the 76ers game. You were in the locker room as the incident occurred. Can you take us through your perspective on what happened between Joel Embiid and Marcus Hayes?
All right, so I'll give you the kind of the timeline. As we walk in, Kyle Lowry has been sent to the media room, which is standard procedure, and Comcast camera follows him. Okay, that usually goes and does the post-game stuff for the Sixers. We're going in to speak to Tyrese Maxey at his locker. His locker, I would say, is about 5 feet away from Joel Embiid, who is sitting there in sweats on his phone as we enter the door. Embiid looks up and he sees Marcus Hayes. Now, Marcus obviously has been writing some columns critical of Embiid. Also, there's the line which has been on social media in one of Marcus's columns that mentions Embiid's brother and son in it. And Embiid sees him, stands up, and starts to basically saying to the effect of, don't mention my brother or my son again, and is angry at it, and his tone is firm. And Marcus, and I know some people will say this, Marcus, to his credit, offers an apology. And Marcus had basically rewrote his column at the time after getting some pushback on the original one back on October 23rd. And Embiid says, I don't want your apology. And there's other words in there. I'm trying to parse my language as I'm going along, Ray.
I appreciate that.
And basically says, I don't care what you guys write. And Marcus goes, but you do, in response. And that sends Embiid up another level. And we're all kind of standing there. Embiid, I should point out, Maxey's still sitting in his chair, like waiting for us to kind of come around and start talking to him. And Embiid gets angry more and more, saying how he doesn't. It's not about, you can criticize me and my own performance and all that, but leave my family out of it. And there's a little bit of a back and forth. Says you've done this in the past. Marcus says he doesn't. And at a certain point, Embiid kind of extends his arm out and pushes the shoulder and pushes him back. It's not like a there's no intent to knock him down. There's nothing, but he does make contact at that point, which is when Sixer PR gets between him and Hayes. A security guard who stands outside the club, the locker room, comes in to kind of add to that, to separate, to stand in front of Marcus, basically to make sure Marcus doesn't go. I don't think Marcus was going to go after him. He certainly didn't give any impression he was going to go after him. And also to kind of de-escalate the situation, the Sixers PR people move us out of the locker room, or trying to move us out of the locker room, moving Maxey out into the hallway. And that's when one of the security guys, who's their version of Big Dom, if you will, yells, "Guys, please don't write about this." And to which Embiid responds, "I don't care," basically, using other words.
You can check out the full story about what Kevin Cooney said on 975thefanatic.com, and there's a link in the show notes to get there. And then on top of that, you had the story with Jason Kelce, and it's a video that I'm sure pretty much all of the listeners have seen by now, but Kelce was a guest picker on College Game Day up at Penn State, Ohio State, walking around having a beer, I guess. He had his case of beer in his hand in the video. An idiot behind him starts to yell gay slurs about his brother Travis and dating Taylor Swift. Completely out of line on the comments. Jason Kelce turned around, walked back, grabbed the guy's phone and smashed it on the ground. So, two pretty interesting incidents. I use the word interesting lightly, but a lot to unpack on both of those. So when you talk about certain things like this, you want to separate what's right and wrong from what's deserved from what's undeserved. Think about standing up for family members. Think about the internet and how it's changed people's mentality towards the world. And Chris Long made some great points about this when he was a guest on another show. But most of all, think about the right way to handle things. And I think this traces back to Jason Kelce's apology that he gave on Monday Night Football, saying he met hate with hate. And I'm going to be an absolute hypocrite here as a person who's acted rashly like a million times to things I'll take personally, but it's how I feel about the whole situation. That idiot at Penn State deserves what he got, Kelce breaking his phone. Who feels bad for some random punk who had the audacity to speak to someone that way? Why? He probably thought it was funny or something, but what's your end game? Get somebody else in trouble? Get a celebrity to, come and punch you in the face? Did you think that was going to be good on the internet? Was that actually his purpose in the situation? I don't really know. But that also leads me to Joel Embiid, and really the Inquirer columnist, who, like all writers who are covering sports in the modern era, have to worry about clicks and internet traffic and what's appealing to readers on the internet. When I'm writing, I do it all the time. I do it more responsibly, though. To suggest an athlete isn't making his son or his dead brother proud by sitting out games is so over the line. So you have two people who brought this on themselves. Neither was actually physically harmed, by the way. The Inquirer columnist did get shoved, according to Kevin. It wasn't really an attempt to injure or even knock the guy over. So I think Embiid also crossed the line by putting his hands on a reporter, but I'm not going to go crazy about this guy's physical safety. And by the way, let's be honest, if Joel Embiid actually fought an average-sized person who's not in the condition of a pro basketball player, we'd be having a much different conversation right now. So on the surface, that's my initial response to the weekend's news. But after the break, I'll give you the real takeaway that any aspiring person in any profession, in any walk of life, needs to think about in response to these stories.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. talking a lot about the Jason Kelce and Joel Embiid incidents over the weekend, and I want to touch on something that you probably didn't expect to hear when you started to listen to this show. Remember back to the early 2000s, you probably went and saw Spider-Man in the movie theater with your friend like in grade school when you had off for, I don't know, Martin Luther King Day or something, and you heard that quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." If you can move past that corny drama that I just laid on you, you'll see that Joel Embiid and Jason Kelce both ignored that. They have way more to lose than the people they went after. Just because those people deserved what they got doesn't mean that Kelce and Embiid should have given it to them. Joel Embiid's going to get suspended, and that ironically might be a good thing. I heard people spinning conspiracies that he did it on purpose for the load management. Missing a few NBA regular season games isn't that much of a punishment, but that doesn't change the point I'm trying to make. Sure, they were both wrong, but who's really feeling the consequences here? The people that care about paying for a digital copy of the Philadelphia Inquirer are a lot smaller audience than the people noticing that Joel Embiid is in serious trouble now by the NBA and that he just hurt the 76ers, who have limped out of the gates this season at 1-5 without their best player. In the case of Jason Kelce, he had to apologize on ESPN, and I don't think that he's going to feel that many greater consequences. But what he said about hate meeting hate is something that I think is actually pretty sincere. This is the guy who is maybe better than almost any pro athlete at building himself up as a personal brand. And that's what anyone looking to cover sports full-time should do, by the way. This guy made a position for himself in the media before he ever even retired from the NFL. And he just put it all on the line for some drunk college kid who dropped a gay slur. Who cares about who that kid is, how he's going to replace that phone, or what's going to happen to him in general? Who really cares about an Inquirer columnist either? Maybe if you're in the city, in this market, and in sports media. But again, that's a pretty small denomination of people. But the greater point here is that you as an individual can determine that you're better than that, especially in the modern age. Decide you're above some guy at Penn State who's name-calling and looking for a reaction. Decide you're better than somebody who wrote something, who looked to get attention and ignored personal lines and a sensitive family problem, all just to criticize a basketball player. And when I said at the top of the show that I look for things that'll grab attention in a digital audience, yeah, I meant it, but I did not mean somebody who crosses the sensitivity of a deceased family member. And you might have heard what I said about John Tortorella just a couple weeks ago in a past episode. That's a very different circumstance. The way that John Tortorella snapped back at me that I didn't necessarily like, that was about hockey, and that was just on a different level than the incident that happened with Joel Embiid. But these two high-profile athletes, and anybody that has high aspirations in life, needs to be better than that. The mindset should not be about what another person deserves. An eye for an eye is not really going to help you. Get another 100 cliches and list them below what I just said, and you have this situation in a nutshell. But I wanted to address a few other things that not enough people really considered, at least in my evaluation of what I heard in the reaction to these couple stories in the few days that followed them. First of all, the Inquirer editors never should have let that story about Joel Embiid run. The columnist is the one who wrote it. He's the one who's getting the attention. But the editors got to take their fair share of the blame there too. And Kevin Cooney did a great job of pointing that out. Joel Embiid, another person who's going to take his fair share of the blame. People might not have a problem with what he did just objectively on the surface to this guy that, yes, was out of line, probably deserves some sort of consequence. But if you listen to the Associated Press journalist that was on 97.5 The Fanatic and that witnessed this incident in the locker room, he pointed out that Embiid ignored the fact that there were other ways to handle this. This can happen with reporters and athletes. You've seen it plenty of times. Embiid could have had a sit-down meeting in private with the Inquirer columnist. He could have gone about this in 100 different ways. He chose to do this. Even if he had just left it at what he said publicly, I think it was on Friday afternoon, he called the writer out during his press availability. The writer wasn't there at the time, but nobody even really cared about that. He dropped some expletives and came back at the writer. I don't think anybody really had a problem with that. It wouldn't have been a huge story if the physical contact hadn't happened on Saturday. But Embiid deliberately chose to take it one step further. He chose to let the criticism get to him. And this is another thing that's easy to say if you're not in the situation. I'm going to talk about something on a much smaller scale. Me ignoring social media comments, it's a little thing that I have to deal with in my life, but could happen on this podcast. Drop a positive comment on the podcast, by the way. Leave a 5-star rating. But I will get negative comments on my articles all the time. For some reason, people feel the need to patrol the internet and just insult people for the sake of insulting people. I just kind of ignore it at this point. I like to get internet traffic, so I will occasionally comment back, but I'm not going to engage in fights with people because they're just not worth my time and energy. Athletes who worry too much about criticism from the media and from really anyone on the outside aren't doing themselves any favors anymore. Like I said, we're talking about very, very different things here. Two situations that are on different scales, with me comparing my level of exposure on just written digital articles and somebody like Joel Embiid, who's one of the best players in the NBA, one of the most recognizable athletes in Philadelphia. The bigger issue, though, is worrying about the outside criticism to the point where you've allowed it to affect your concentration in meeting your own goal. Joel Embiid should be worried about the Sixers right now. He has not helped the team, whether you want to say that's because of load management or whatever. That's not really the issue here. The issue is that he just gave the Sixers another roadblock into climbing out of this regular season hole that they're already in after 6 games. Jason Kelce kind of did the same thing. Probably not at as big of a scale, but he didn't really help his personal brand as the guy that everybody loves in this situation. And especially in the case of Embiid, you have to look at what escalated this incident before the physical contact was made. Once he had the argument with the guy from the Philadelphia Inquirer, he said, "Oh, I don't really care about what the media thinks." And the columnist said, "But you do." And this is all according to Kevin Cooney. I'm going by his story, taking it for true, because I believe Kevin's a good reporter and we've had a good relationship in our time together at the Fanatic. But the Inquirer columnist, after he said that, that's what really set Joel Embiid off. And you know what? I think he was right. Joel Embiid is too worried about this. I'm not sticking up for what was written. I think it was ridiculous. I'll emphasize that point over and over. I just don't see any need to go there. But Joel Embiid has to ignore that stuff. And he could have handled this in so many other ways without being detrimental to himself. And that's exactly what he did on Saturday night. Switch back to the Jason Kelce story. There is another share of the blame here. Why in God's name does Jason Kelce walk around college tailgates without a security team? This is one of the biggest celebrities in the world of football at this point. This guy is huge. He gets his own documentary, his own podcast. The Travis Kelce and the Taylor Swift story is making him so much bigger than he was in the first place. And I'm going to trace this back to an event I was at, Fanatic Fan Fest back in September. Andre Drummond of the Sixers was our featured guest. Dude rolled up with like 6 guys on his team of professionals. So why doesn't Jason Kelce have a security team to deal with idiots like this, who are bound to pop up, by the way, whether it was right or wrong? So Jason Kelce, if you're listening, you got enough money to avoid these ridiculous traps anymore. You should hire some badass security guard to deal with these types of problems so you don't end up in trouble. And if anybody in the comments wants to tell me that he has that type of security team, you just didn't see him in the video, well, I mean, you're welcome to do that. I think that probably could have solved this altogether. And at this point, I think Jason Kelce is above walking around tailgates with drunk college kids, and the situation kind of led him into that whole idea of hate meets hate. I hope the audience is receptive to this episode. It's probably the first time I've shared my personal feelings and my professional demeanor, my determination, and how I approach sports media, and related it to what I've done for a long time and carried myself in that walk of life. Check out the show elements on my social media pages. Leave comments on Spotify now. This is becoming really fun for me, and I'm hoping to do some new things with this show. Very excited about the Sixers guest that I think is coming in. I'm Colin Newby. This is First Time, Long Time.